The Nebraska Environmental Trust was established in 1992 and provides funding for conservation, enhancement, and restoration of the state's natural resources. More than 1,600 projects have been funded in all 93 counties. The Environmental Trust funds projects through grants to state agencies, nonprofit, and for-profit organizations, as well as private individuals. The grant money comes not from taxes, but rather the Nebraska Lottery.
The Environmental Trust means a lot to the Nebraska Lottery because that's the reason that the lottery's here. Back in 1992, when the legislature passed the law and it was voted in by the Nebraska voters by more than 60%, the lottery came into being to support good causes like the Environmental Trust. Lottery revenues are divided 44.5% to the Environmental Trust, 44.5% to education, 10% to the state fair, and 1% to the Compulsive Gamblers Assistance Fund.
Projects must fall into one of the following categories: habitat, soil management, surface and groundwater, air quality, or waste management. The project must benefit the public, and trust funds will only be given to proposals that are deemed technically and financially feasible. The Trust Board is comprised of 9 citizen representatives who are appointed by the governor to serve 6-year terms. 3 are chosen from each congressional district and serve without pay and represent a wide variety of natural resources. 5 agency directors make up the remaining seats. Vince Cramper was on the NET board for 20 years, handpicked by former Governor Ben Nelson.
Well, I was one of the original members on the board. 1993, 92, 93 is when we started, and it just looked to me like this would be a good way to get conservation in the state of Nebraska. And I loved it that the lottery board said that the money must be spent for certain things. In our case, the environment, and the other half to the education.
To Vince, the board truly represents all Nebraskans.
They come from all walks of life, the legislative part, and the farmers to the lawyers. It really gives it a diverse spectrum of what we can do and ideas that come forth.
Grant applications must be submitted to the Trust by September, which the Trust Grant Committee evaluates and ranks. The following February, the preliminary results are announced, and in April, the final grants are awarded. The Trust brings together public and private patrons for innovative projects. Grant applications must meet certain application requirements. Each applicant must demonstrate that their project will have clear environmental benefits, benefit the public, be technically and financially feasible, and utilize the resources of partners. It's rare that the Trust finances entire projects. Instead, grant money is used as seed money to attract matching grants and money from other sources. Here are a few examples of some of the projects that have been funded by the Trust over the past 2 decades. Habitat includes projects that preserve or restore native habitats and areas critical to at-risk or endangered species. The Nebraska Environmental Trust was a partner in funding the purchase of Spring Creek Prairie, an Audubon prairie southwest of Lincoln.
Tallgrass prairie, which is our native ecosystem in the eastern third of Nebraska, or so eastern quarter, is the most threatened ecosystem in North America. There's less than 2% of it left, and these last large blocks that we have are just critically important to both us as part of our heritage, but also the birds and different animals that are dependent on tallgrass prairie.
Also, we help participate in building the nature center that you see in the background. Thousands of families and children enjoy this site every year. They come out, they can walk through the prairie, they can see the wetlands, the tallgrass prairie, and actually there's some wagon ruts from the original Kearney cutoff on this property. So it's a real gem just outside of one of the largest cities in Nebraska.
It's so important for kids to have firsthand experience in nature. Both for them, it's such an important part of growing up and being able to experience our prairie heritage and our Nebraska heritage firsthand. Research shows how critically important it is for those childhood experiences and how it impacts your ability to care about conservation as an adult. One of our biggest partnerships is with the Lincoln Public Schools, and through that, all the kids in Lincoln get to, in 4th grade, as part of their classroom curriculum, come out to a prairie. In that program alone, a little over 1,300 kids, 4th graders, each year come out and spend the day at the prairie. And that's just one example. We have school groups come from about a 60-mile radius to experience the prairie because, again, there just is hardly any left. And if people want that, we even have schools from Omaha that come because they want their kids to be able to experience our native prairie.
The saline wetlands are Predominantly in Nebraska, just in Lancaster County and southern Saunders County. At one time, there used to be about 16,000 acres of saline wetlands. Currently, there's less than 4,000 acres.
Saline wetlands are driven by a saline aquifer, which over time has infiltrated up through various seeps and saturated the soils. These soils then become saline. There are a few plant species that become accustomed to the harsher environment. The saline wetlands are unique in not only their hydrology, but for their endangered vegetation and wildlife, such as the saltwater plant and the Salt Creek tiger beetle.
We do have the endangered Salt Creek tiger beetle, which exists on these properties. I believe the last count was less than 400. It was declared a federally endangered species in 2007.
The zoning requirements for lots in the area requires 20 acres or more. While the high grounds surrounding the floodplains and wetlands are the only areas open for development at the moment, the saline wetlands closer to the urban areas are under more pressure for development. A partnership was formed in order to protect these wetlands.
The Saline Wetland Conservation Partnership is a partnership consisting of the City of Lincoln, Lancaster County, Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, and Lower Platte South Natural Resource District. It was initiated in the year 2002 through the City of Lincoln applying for a Nebraska Environmental Trust Fund grant. Initially, we utilized the trust funds for acquisition of properties. We have evolved now to where we use it for acquisition, restoration, and even project planning. We wouldn't be able to do a lot of this work without the assistance of the Environmental Trust. I think we're very fortunate to have that particular source to provide for future generations to have the ability to go out and see these areas. I know I've traveled and talked to other people in other states, and they're quite envious that we do have this particular funding source to assist us with the conservation of natural resources.
The Nebraska Environmental Trust has also partnered in the past with the Nebraska Land Trust, who help landowners obtain conservation easements on their land. A conservation easement is a voluntary land preservation agreement, a legal contract that states what is allowed on the land in the future, such as agriculture or improvement to the habitat, and what is not allowed, such as subdivision development.
When you purchase a conservation easement, you're basically purchasing the development rights on that property. And there is a federal program that will provide 50% of the funding, but then you have to find non-federal matching funds. And without the Environmental Trust, none of these projects could have happened because there just aren't the kind of matching funds available that we need to do big projects like this and of a landscape scale scope.
Because agricultural landowners have most of their assets tied up in their land, they aren't able to afford to donate a major part of their asset base, their land, for conservation. The purchase of a conservation easement offers an alternative to selling their land for development. The landowners are paid a fair value for the land put under easement, while the land is protected from future development.
Now I want to make clear, conservation easements aren't about stopping development and growth everywhere. They're about protecting special places as growth occurs. And here in the Schramm Bluffs, we have one of those special places on the Lower Platte River. It's the only county in Nebraska that's surrounded on three sides by major rivers. You have the Missouri River on the eastern border and the Platte River on the southern and western borders of the county. And that creates great wildlife habitat. And in fact, there's oak hickory woodlands along this stretch of the Platte, which are rare in Nebraska. They only go as far up the Platte as about Fremont. And so oak hickory woodlands are a very small percentage of the woodlands in a state that has very few woodlands. And because of these woodlands' importance, they're a magnet for birds. This area around Schramm State Park is an Audubon important bird area. Sarpy County is unique in other ways too. It has very important farm soils that could be washed away if they were developed, or certainly if they're put under concrete, they're never going to be farmed again. These are soils of statewide importance, and it's also part of the state where you can actually grow a crop without irrigation. And in Nebraska, that's somewhat rare, and I think we need to be cognizant of the fact of protecting farmland where we can still grow food without having to use irrigation, which is becoming more and more limited. It's an extremely rich area for Native American culture and pioneer culture, and there's all kinds of sites throughout these bluffs. And so when you consider the natural, historical, and agricultural resources that you find in Sarpy County, it's the perfect place for the Nebraska Land Trust to be working. But it's also the perfect place for another reason, and that is that there's huge development pressure in Sarpy County. Sarpy County is the fastest growing county in the state in terms of population.
My wife and me, Carol, own this particular farm, about 170 some acres. We've been trying to figure out a way to protect it from development because the developers keep knocking on our doors, and there's so much here that needs to be protected.
Ron and Carol are one of the many landowners in the Schramm Bluffs who chose a conservation easement with the Nebraska Land Trust over selling their land to developers.
We know we'll have a competent body enforcing the easement in the future when we're not here. And that's what we feel is the best thing we could do, for the property. The land is about the only thing that's forever. You can tear buildings down, you can everything, but once you mess up that land and the developers, level it, it's pretty well gone.
One criticism of the trust is that money is spent on private as well as public land. However, with over 97% of all land in the state of Nebraska held privately, it is imperative to work with landowners to preserve and protect the state's natural resources. In fact, in order to ensure the public is benefiting from trust grants, all private applicants must demonstrate with their proposal the advantage the public will gain through their program if funded.
That's very significant for Nebraskans because anyone who's ever crossed the Platte River on I-80 and looked downstream and said, gee, that's a pretty view, they're looking right at the Schramm Bluffs. And so this is literally a landscape that millions of people traveling on I-80 see every year, and the thousands that are lucky enough to get off the interstate and actually see it close up are even more impressed.
Hod Kosman has been an integral part of trust grants in the Wildcat Hills.
Well, these lands are really important to our community and our region because they're open to the public. And these lands have been well stewarded by the ranching families that many of them from the 1800s have owned them. And they wanted these ranches to stay the same. They wanted them to be ranches. They didn't want alternative uses of these ranches. And we, as a conservation buyer, were their choice. In the Wildcat Hills, we have large populations of large mammals, and they need space, and they need unfragmented space. It is a biologically unique landscape, and as such, the fragmentation would be very detrimental to it. There are alternatives that maybe can pay more money than what a rancher can pay. In the West, we've seen a virtual explosion of fragmentation from what we would call ranchettes. And so those that would take these lands and split them into 40 or 50 acre ranchettes. Environmental trust allows us to dream bigger dreams. It challenges us to have stronger outcomes. We are a big volunteer organization. We have many, many, many volunteers. And when we get those dollars, it's a validation of the efforts that they've put in. And those validations become cultural. And then they become generational. Our motto is what we do is forever, and forever is a very long time. And on the flip side of that is that what we don't do can be forever as well.
Soil management grants include projects that preserve, conserve, and restore soil health. Ed George was instrumental in an FFA application for an agricultural education soils grant.
And so we applied to the Nebraska Environmental Trust for a soils grant to helping the teachers with curriculum, lesson plans, soil testing equipment, and resources for classroom and laboratory and field research projects. They were provided a soil probe. They went out into the field and actually took soil samples. Individuals who had expertise and wanted to share their knowledge after their career with helping these students to think about the importance of land, conservation, natural resources, food production, and maybe will help them to find careers and want to stay in Nebraska. One comment from a teacher was after his 30 years of teaching, this was the best program he had ever participated in. It was ready-to-go curriculum that they didn't have to develop for their students in their classroom. We've even had inquiries from the many teachers in Nebraska that teach science. And so we're hoping that this soils project will help those students understand the importance of soil productivity in relationship to our soil test.
Surface and groundwater grants include projects that preserve or restore lakes, waterways, and groundwater from degradation or depletion. those that research, design, or foster best management practices or efficiently and effectively manage water use. In 2008, the City of Lincoln Rain Garden Project grant was approved to support rain gardens installed by Lincoln residents. A rain garden is a garden of native shrubs, perennials, and flowers planted in a small depression, which is generally formed on a natural slope. It is designed to temporarily hold and soak in rainwater runoff that flows from roofs, driveways, patios, or lawns. Rain gardens are effective in removing up to 90% of nutrients and chemicals and up to 80% of sediments from the rainwater runoff. Compared to a conventional lawn, rain gardens allow for 30% more water to soak into the ground. It is not a pond or a wetland, but is dry most of the time and typically holds water during and following a rainfall event. In 2003, the City of Lincoln undertook the largest and most environmentally sophisticated urban aquatic habitat rehabilitation project in Nebraska. The 110-acre Holmes Lake, built in 1962 within the City of Lincoln, had approximately 400,000 cubic yards of sediment removed in order to restore it to its approximate original depths. The Trust has provided millions of dollars to lake rehabilitation across the state, including Lake Ogallala, Lake Wanahoo, and Lake Erickson, just to name a few. Another project the Environmental Trust has had a hand in helping was the purchase and restoration of Heron Haven.
Heron Haven at 120th and Maple Street in Omaha, Nebraska is a little piece of heaven right here in the urban setting.
Heron Haven is a spring-fed wetland sanctuary. The sanctuary features one of the last oxbow wetlands of the Big Papillion Creek, and it is within Omaha's city limits. Biology and ecology students from local schools and universities use the wetland to conduct ecological studies and surveys of native species of plants and aquatic animals. There's also an education center where lectures and short courses on conservation, birding, photography, and natural history are offered. Ione Worthman has been an integral part of Heron Haven since the beginning, when the wetlands were